just to see James Manson thunder away and try to offer up anything that he had to the Chief Justice to try and push it over the line. It was inspiring to see. All right, everybody, we are at the end of the proceeding. So this is our prorogation hearing recap video. First one that I dropped was yesterday, so you can take a look at day one. But what an interesting experience it's been sitting in court, listening to the arguments presented by both sides and literally watching history in the making. So what happened today? Well, as expected, the onus was now on the government to respond to the JCCF's arguments that they presented yesterday, as well as the intervener arguments by Democracy Watch and the BCCLA. For those that are unfamiliar, JCCF stands for the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms, and the BCCLA is the British Columbia Civil Liberties Association, pardon me. So that was essentially the side plus Democracy Watch for the prorogation challenge. And then they had the government as well as an intervener, I believe from the University of Ottawa, that was against the prorogation challenge. So the government's job today was to refute that A, this prorogation challenge should even be happening, and B, why the judge should just ignore it and dismiss it outright. So the government came with a few different points of attack. Number one, they were arguing that the decision of prorogation had nothing to do with the Prime Minister. That's in the hands of the Governor General. And by arguing that, they're essentially attacking one of the main arguments of the JCCF, which is that the Prime Minister acted inappropriately. So the government is essentially saying it doesn't matter if the Prime Minister acts appropriately or not in terms of the recommendation. It wasn't up to him to prorogue, it was up to the Governor General. So if the judge were to agree with that, then the whole claim, falls in its face. The next thing that they were trying to say is that one of the JCCF's points was that to avoid the confidence vote that would have brought down the government was one of the reasons that the government prorogued Parliament. And what the government is saying is that is anticipatory, meaning there's no evidence that suggests that would happen with any sort of certainty. They're saying, essentially, despite the fact that all three opposition parties, including the NDP, in writing, has said that they would bring down the government at the earliest opportunity, it's all politics, and you can't trust politics, and that you can only trust it happening when it actually happens. And they said that the Governor General's role is to ensure confidence of the House, and they were citing the three previous confidence votes where the NDP voted with the Liberals to show that, yes, the government does have confidence in the House. So you can't talk about that. And then they went on to really the core of their argument. And the core of their argument was resting in technicalities. So what does that mean? Well, they're essentially saying that, listen, convention is what rules government. Not law, but convention. And convention, by definition, is essentially a rule that everyone kind of just agrees to, but isn't necessarily written down. So they're saying that courts can't get involved in conventions, and courts shouldn't be getting involved in political matters, and tried to cite cases where, that was mentioned. They're also trying to say that, and cite examples of cases where courts didn't get involved in, prime ministerial decisions of withdrawing from treaties and declaring war and withdrawing from the Kyoto Accord and things like that. So they're essentially trying to say that there's no jurisdiction of the court when it comes to this matter of prorogation, because it's a political matter, it is not a legal matter, and there is no legal grounds and legal footing to actually stand upon to say that this is illegal or legal. So that was the crux of what they were trying to say. They were also saying that, listen, the JCCF is trying to essentially say that there's this unwritten principle of the Constitution, which many people agree that there are unwritten parts of the Constitution, that there's no case where an unwritten rule was actually used to actually prove a case. And the Chief Justice asked point blank, there's no case? I seem to remember, one or two cases, and the government was emphatic. Nope, absolutely not. There is no case. There is no case. And I remember thinking at the time, and I think I tweeted this out, that if the JCCF can actually find a case, then that's going to really shoot a hole in the government's argument. We'll come back to that in a minute. And then I had to take a break for about an hour and a half to do something for Northern Perspective, which you're going to see and hear about in a bit. So we actually secured the interview that we wanted to, so stand by. But then I was able to get back after the afternoon break ended, and from the people that I talked to there, I didn't really miss much, which is nice. But what ended up happening in the afternoon is that the government also tried to talk about the UK case. And I had cautioned that the more you try and talk about how something is different, you also expose how there's a lot of similarities. So what the government was trying to say is that in the UK case, and this is the whole basis of what the JCCF was using as precedent, since it is the only case that exists in the world of a prorogation challenge, is essentially that you have a case in Britain where there is a massive change coming to the Constitution because because Britain was exiting from the European Union. That was the whole Brexit ordeal, and Parliament was being prorogued 5 of the 8 weeks that it would have sat until this deadline. And the argument was, that was appropriate for the court to rule on that because Parliament had to sit. They had to address this national issue, and Parliament had to actually rule on that, despite the fact that the cabinet was saying, no, we can handle this, it's fine, and we have our own agenda. But the court disagreed and ended up saying, no, this is an illegal prorogation, and you have to actually go back. Now, what the court also said was, we acknowledge that this is a once in a lifetime type of thing. This has never happened before. It's probably never going to happen again. And the government was saying that using those words, it was to essentially isolate that decision, so you can't use it as precedent. Well, the government doesn't get to decide that now, do they? So then you had a intervener from the University of Ottawa, I believe, named Andrew Bernstein. He was speaking for the government, but he was talking about the United States and Gore versus Bush and an election down there. And it was this really, really long and drawn out roundabout word salad about, I believe he was trying to say that courts shouldn't mess with politics. That's essentially what he was saying. But he then went on to say that democracy is important, but the principle of democracy is indeterminate. You can't define it. So my question was, okay, well then how can you say something is important when you can't even define what it is? So it was very, very strange that this person was arguing what they were. The Chief Justice was visibly confused as to what this guy was saying, and I think everybody in the room was just glad when it came to an end. So and then at the end of the day, the JCCF had their opportunity to stand up and start to have the opportunity to rebut a lot of these arguments that the government put forward. So one of the best ones was that one of their counsel, the JCCF counsel lawyers, stood up and actually brought an example of a case where an unwritten rule was actually used to support a case, and that case was successful. And that's what the Chief Justice was looking for, an example of that. So as soon as that example was provided, that blew a massive hole in the government's main argument, and I'll get to why in a second. But as soon as he brought that example forward, Chief Justice said, "Okay, awesome, thank you." He didn't say awesome, but you know what I mean. There was no questions. He was just pleased that somebody found an example of that, because that gives him some grounding to look at this case with. And then James Manson got up, and I wish you could have seen him. I really do. He was fighting hard, real hard. I almost felt like I was in a courtroom drama the way it was going, but he was passionate, and he was really arguing hard. What was he arguing? So he was arguing against this whole fact that the government is saying, well, the courts don't have any business in politics, and they shouldn't get in politics. And James Manson was saying, no, there's actually some legal leeway in there, because what he is saying is that a constitutional principle can lead to, so principles in our Constitution can lead to obligations, a legal obligation of people that are bound by the Constitution. So what he's saying is the Prime Minister is bound by the Constitution legally to act and govern in good faith. That's what he's saying. So he's trying to use that, and that's the unwritten rule, by the way. He's trying to use that to tie the Prime Minister to the Constitution and say that there's a legal obligation for him to act in good faith. And so if there's a legal obligation, then that means that somebody must have their legal right affected by him not doing that, right? So that was the question from the Chief Justice to James Manson. Okay, so whose rights are violated? And James Manson said, well, anyone in the public, including my clients. And this goes to refute one of the other points that the government made, is that the government says that the charter violation that the JCCF is alleging was broken was Section 3. And Section 3 is essentially the right to the right of the electorate, the right to participate in an election. And the JCCF extends that by arguing that it's not just the right to vote somebody, it's the right to have an elected representative represent you in government. So where that follows, you can probably see where that's going, is that we have a right, according to the JCCF, to have elected representatives that we vote for sit in government to represent us on our behalf and to legislate on our behalf. So the argument here is that because the Prime Minister acted in bad faith and prorogued government, that violated the legal rights of all Canadians because our representatives aren't in government legislating and representing us on our behalf. That's essentially what this all boils down to in the argument of the JCCF. And the Chief Justice, he seemed very intrigued at this point. And he's saying, okay, so if we were to kind of take this, how would I rule on this, and how would we essentially apply a legal test in future cases? Because that kind of goes into the ruling, because they need to justify their ruling, right? And that's so that, appeal courts can look at the decision and essentially run through the test of their reasoning to then make a determination, did they rule appropriately? And James Manson just says, yeah, you look back to the UK case. And then he also says that we are in completely uncharted waters here. We're stumbling in the dark because nothing like this has ever happened. And he says, all the cases you've heard of today and all the cases you heard of yesterday, there is no case that has been brought up that is like this case because it's never been tried before. It's never been reviewed before. Now, the government also argued that, well, because there's no legal recourse, there's no legal guidance, therefore the court shouldn't rule on it. And James Manson very wisely said, I agree, there is no legal guidance on here. That's why we're here. That's how laws are made. That's how precedents are set. So that's why we're here. And the Chief Justice seemed intrigued, and he wanted just a little bit more, and just to see James Manson thunder away and try to offer up anything that he had to the Chief Justice to try and push it over the line. It was inspiring to see. It really was. So if you're able to see it on Zoom, you got to watch it, but it was really something to see. It was in like the last 20 minutes of the day today. So how do I feel at the end of this? I don't know. You'd have to be inside the head of the Chief Justice. His body language seemed positive. The way he was responding to James Manson at the end of the JCCF seemed positive. I thought the government's arguments were very weak, but it's all going to depend on how the Chief Justice looks at this. Now, I'd say, put it this way, I'm not in a feeling of despair. I'm not thinking, oh, well, the JCCF blew it. I am not there at all. I think they did as good a job as they could have done. And I think it gave a real shot. I do. The Chief Justice seemed fair throughout the whole thing. I got no sense of bias whatsoever. So he left it saying, thank you, everybody. You've given me a lot to think about. And he said he needs to make a decision in a reasonable time frame that doesn't render this issue moot. So he's going to be making a decision far before the prorogation deadline on March 24th. So we will see, but now we wait, folks. Now we wait, and we'll have to see how this plays out. But it's unfortunate that we're one of the only, call it channels, media organization, whatever you want to call it, anywhere that is really covering this. But it's one of the most important issues in Canada. It's disappointing that it isn't getting more attention than it is, but this is why we drove to Ottawa. This is why we're here, to make sure that we're bringing this to everybody and to be able to translate this into everyday language, because it's tough. There was some times there where I was sitting there for a little bit piecing together what was being said, because I was having some trouble essentially interpreting what they were saying. So, but this is where we're at. It was a privilege to be there. And I hope you found this video helpful. I hope you found yesterday's video helpful. But this is the recap of the prorogation hearing. So unfortunately, we don't have any sense of how this is going to go. But I would rather it be 50-50 than have essentially a 90% certainty that we're not going to win. So thank you, everybody, for your comments, your support, your shares, and we'll wait and see, and we will follow this to conclusion. We'll see you in the comments.